Welcome to The Big Picture. I'm Phil Arno. New York State is now in the hands of one party. The Democrats will, for the foreseeable future, have their way. One question that comes to mind might be, what will that effect be now on the Second Amendment rights in the state? There are a little over 19 million people currently living in the state, and it's estimated that there are over 17 million guns owned here. So whatever the Democrats decide to do will affect a lot of people with a lot of firearms. Now, we've heard arguments on both sides of this issue forever. On the one hand, it's claimed that, among other things, more guns mean a more dangerous society. On the other hand, it's said that more guns make people safer and that we all have the right to self-defense. Today, the media has given up all efforts to pretend that they're unbiased. All you have to do is look at the facts. Analysis of coverage by the media of political issues, what's called the mainstream media, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, among others. Tracking shows that between 87 and 92% of social, environmental, and political coverage is slanted to favor left-leaning positions. Now, with that kind of coverage, it's a wonder that there are any conservatives left in this country. And you know what? If you poll young people, the ones with the least life experience, the least knowledge that springs from the real world, and those who are the most influenced by fancy branding and names like Protect the Planet and the SAFE Act, if you poll those young people, they're getting the message. Why do you think, for instance, that socialism is on the rise in our country? Our youth has no idea what socialism is or what it's resulted in wherever it's been tried, wherever it's been in power. Cuba, the Soviet Union, China, North Korea, Venezuela. The message they get is that socialism works. Look, there are a lot of freedoms in this country that can disappear. Make no mistake. Wise men set up our system to fight off the challenges that threaten freedom. But it takes effort. It takes awareness. It is a challenge. And that challenge will be no greater anywhere than it will be in the next number of years right here in New York State. My guest today on The Big Picture is no stranger to that Second Amendment fight. Budd Schroeder is Chairman Emeritus of S.C.O.P.E right here in New York. He's a certified firearms instructor and former director with the NRA. And he's director of the 1791 Society Political Action Committee. Welcome to the show, Budd. This is a topic that's been talked about forever almost, and it's been with us since the Founding Fathers made the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. You're very familiar with the Second Amendment and firearms. What do you think about the arguments that are posed constantly? You know, what's the biggest myth that's fed to the people, you know, about why guns shouldn't be in society?
Well, for one thing, I've had like 54 years experience being a Second Amendment activist. And I've heard a lot of things along the way. And most of the things that they say that about gun control, it isn't about guns, it's controlling people. Because no matter what laws they pass, criminals won't obey them. So I hate this term that they call gun violence. Actually, it should be changed to the criminal misuse of firearms. A gun by itself is not dangerous, any more than a car by itself is dangerous. That's not dangerous until somebody gets into it. And if that person drinks too much, it becomes more dangerous. So the whole point is that if there's going to be any positive movement for it, gun control actually means people control. And they have to come through with something that'll change the mind of criminals And I think they've been doing that for an awfully long time.
Well, if you look behind this, the motivations, and I like to do that, and that's one of the reasons we call this the big picture, is because we tend to want to look at the motivation and the reasoning behind a lot of the things that happen. More people get killed with cars, and more people get killed, you know, in accidents that happen with other household, you know, things, and nothing is attacked quite like firearms. And one of the things that I'm sure people who have this message that condemns firearms, one of the things in their minds is we can defend ourselves with firearms. We can be more independent as a society if we have firearms. And in the back of their minds, it's the people who really want government to be dominant. They want government to be in control. An armed society is less dependent on government to protect them. You know, they're more independent. And I think, you know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but, you know, in my experience and with the logic that, you know, has kind of been drummed into my head, that seems to be a motivation.
Phil, you're absolutely right. That if you just looked at the historical background of it, any country that went from being free into being run by a ruler, despot, and so forth, the first thing they did is they confiscated the weapons. Adolf Hitler was a prime consideration on that thought. So was Stalin, Pol Pot, the Chinese emperor, or so forth. I
just read an article last week about Venezuela doing exactly the same thing.
Exactly the same thing, and look what's happening. People are starving in the streets. Of course, the politicians are eating well, but the people are starving. And that's the whole point that I made. The founding fathers did not put the Second Amendment in such a personal spot on that. As a matter of fact, Charlton Heston, when he gave a speech, he used to say that the reason that it had the Second Amendment so prominent, it was like the keystone in an arch. And if the keystone is destroyed or falls out, the whole arch collapses. And it wasn't put in there so that the people could defend themselves from enemies within or without. It was to prevent a despotic government from taking over. It was to protect the people's rights. Now in New York, it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now a lot of politicians in New York, starting with Tim Sullivan, they believe that it isn't a right, it's a privilege. And they did that with the handguns. In New York City, it's no longer a right to possess a rifle or shotgun because that needs a permit as well, and they have to be registered. This is where I'm having a problem, because now with the Democrats in control of everything, we're going to be not citizens, but subjects of the whims of the politicians in New York City and Andrew Cuomo.
Are we going to have any recourse through the courts on this, or is the state going to be able to preempt that?
I'm glad you asked that, because the 1791 Society has 2 lawsuits already filed. The first one is takeoff on the Heller decision that says a person has the right to have a firearm, and it doesn't define it, a firearm of common use in their home. So that means that if they follow through and we win this case, that a person may be able to have a handgun in their home, won't be able to carry it concealed, won't be able to leave the home, but in their home they can have it for personal protection. The second one deals with the stupid part on the magazine capacities. Remember how they started out with the one that if you could not have a magazine that held more than 7 rounds. All right. Then they found out that 10 rounds was the standard for most of the guns that were being sold. So they said, okay, you can have a 10-round magazine, but you can only load it with 7 rounds. Now here is a really crazy part of it. Judge Scretany said that was unconstitutional. And yet it took the district attorneys from the 11 counties in western New York and a couple upstate counties that said, we're not going to prosecute people for having 8, 9, 10 rounds in a 10-round magazine. It was so ridiculous. And when that came out that it was 7 rounds to a magazine, I have a handgun that has 9-round magazines. And I would hold up the 2 magazines in my hand. I said, I have 7 rounds in this hand and 7 rounds in this hand. But if I take 1 round out of this magazine and put it in this magazine, I become a felon. And how does that cut down on gun violence?
Right. You know, something seems very wrong when you have a citizen who really hasn't had any intention to do harm to another citizen and really has no record of wrongdoing. And because of something they merely possess, again, with no ill intention, you've made them a criminal. And something that indeed is legal in most other places in this country. There just seems to be something wrong with that kind of a law. Now, there's a situation that I can describe now as a permit holder myself with a gun that I carry that has maybe 8 rounds. If I'm sitting in a situation in a room where 2 people come in and they have a couple of rifles and they start shooting the place up. And this is something that has happened in San Bernardino. And a lot of people were killed and injured, and I'm a permit holder and I have a firearm and I could potentially stop a threat given the right circumstances. But I only have 8 bullets to work with, and if I'm not the best shot in the world and I'm sitting quite a distance from the threat, maybe 8 rounds is not going to be that effective. I mean, if I had the original firearm that I owned had a 15-round magazine, now that certainly would have been a little more effective, or at least it would have given me a chance to try. And given 8 rounds, I'm not sure I would have done the same thing. I would have tried. You know, you have to think about those things. How effective can I be in a situation like that if I don't have the tools to work with?
You know, Phil, that's a good point, a very, very good point. And what I have found out in my considerable time working in the political arena is that perception is reality. If a politician can come out with a bill that sounds good and people are not smart enough to realize that it only sounds good, well, that can get me votes. And that's a good thing for me to be pushing and to get my name on a bill that says we're going to cut down on these mass murders by doing that.
Well, all right, that's all for this segment. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about what police typically say about these gun laws and the role that they play in protecting people. It's an interesting conversation. We'll be right back after this.